thought we'd do something a little different. We would pull off the highway from 1 Peter and spend this month focusing on truths related to this season. And I'm aware, and this has just been something I've been aware of, as you probably are as well, how popular the study of family trees and genealogy is today. I have read that more than 100 million people this year will have participated in some kind of research through online sites, research related to their family tree. The number's rising. In fact, last year, people who are curious about their family tree spent nearly $3 billion to join websites, pay fees, purchase genealogical products and services, including now your own home DNA kit as well. Researching your ancestry doesn't always turn up positive results, though, right? So it's a little dangerous to do that. You might find some interesting, unsavory characters along the way. I did a little research on people who are researching their family tree. That was more fun to me. So I found one New York filmmaker, Heather Quinlan. She found a few skeletons in her ancestors' closet. One was Thomas Fagan, her grandmother's great-grandfather, who it turned out was quite a character. He killed a man during a drunken fight in the saloon in 1868, hitting him over the head with a chair, ending his life. She also discovered a rather murderous feud in her family, sort of like the Hatfields and McCoys, where they're killing each other. One of her relatives in the 1830s was murdered a relative. When he was caught as a part of this feud, he was hanged. She then discovered that even her own great-great-great-grandfather was involved in the family feud. He also had murdered somebody. He'd been caught, but he escaped with his life after the jailer forgot to lock his cell door. She descended from an escaped convict. Acceptance can be harder, though, depending on how close they are to you. The closer they get to you, maybe the more uncomfortable you might feel. Like Ron Aaron, who set out to piece together his family's past. He discovered a box of documents in the attic of his parents' home when they had passed away and he was settling their estate. And he'd been raised to believe that his forefathers were all upstanding members of the community. The records revealed that his great-grandfather, that wasn't all that far away, his great-grandfather was married to two women at the same time, which, of course, is against the law if you were wondering. But he was arrested after a rather wild police chase and served time in Sing Sing prison for bigamy. Krista Cowan, a genealogist, was working with a client, and when he discovered this, he shut down the research. But she wrote about him discovering that his great-great-grandfather, whom he knew as the Sausage King of Chicago, because he was the owner of a meatpacking plant, was actually a man who'd earned that nickname because he'd murdered his wife and disposed of her body using the sausage grinder at his meatpacking plant. Imagine discovering that kind of, oh, that's why Uncle Fred was named that, okay? Another family researcher found out the real story behind a rather proud family legend. She had set out to explore the oft-told story she'd heard as a child about her great-grandfather. He was a war hero, and the story was he served with General Sherman during that historic march to the sea and the capture of Savannah, Georgia. However, she said when she researched him, she learned he never saw any action at all. In fact, he was discharged after only a few months for his nonstop complaining about his poor health due to, quote, excessive marching and falling over a log. Not exactly a hero. After all, she writes, when I broke the news to my parents and family members, they were not pleased. We'd rather not know some surprising realities of our family history. Of course, you can't study genealogy very long without coming across the rather humorous discovery by Judy Wallman, a professional genealogy researcher. She discovered that she and Senator Harry Reid shared a common ancestor, her great-great-uncle Remus Reid. He'd been hanged for robbing trains in Montana in the late 1880s. She actually found a photograph of the hanging of Remus Reed, and on the back of the photograph she obtained during her research was the inscription, quote, "Remus Reed, sent to prison in 1883, but escaped, robbed Montana railroads 6 times, caught by Pinkerton detectives, convicted and hanged in 1889. Here's the photograph of that event. So for fun, she thought she would email the photograph and the information to Congressman Reed, who, by the way, just retired, to tell him that his family member had been a crook. Well, the records indicated, by the way, that the whole county showed up to watch the hanging of Remus Reed. But sometime later, Harry Reid's office sent back the following statement, having a little fun of their own. And they said, well, according to our research, Remus Reed was a famous cowboy in Montana and had extensive business dealings with the Montana Railroad. In 1887, he was a key player in an investigation by the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And in 1889, Remus passed away during an important civic function held in his honor, when the platform upon which he was standing suddenly collapsed. Well, there are times you'd rather not know who's hanging from your family tree, pun intended, right? You might find something a little embarrassing, maybe something, to be proud of, and you got to be careful there along the way as well. One evangelical author writes, I was kind of proud of my ancestry. He said, I sat down with my little girl and explained with great pride that her grandfather was a preacher, her great-grandfather was a preacher, and she had a great-great-great-grandfather, and he was a preacher too, and her eyes grew wide, and she said, wow, we come from a long line of grandfathers. Isn't that good? That's great. Well, the most famous family tree in existence, it's been researched and studied for centuries, happens to be located on the first page of your New Testament, so I want you to turn there. We'll spend several study sessions here. This is the most inspected genealogy in human history. And by the way, as you're turning, I don't probably need to say it, but I'm going to say it. If this family tree isn't correct, none of us are going to heaven. In fact, there may not be a heaven. This may just be an empty religion related to a dead man and with a truckload of empty promises. Over the next few weeks, I want to do some genealogical research with you, all right? There's no membership fee, and all of the material has already been provided here in Matthew 1. We have time today to sort of do a flyover of this family tree. We're going to drop in for a closer look at verse 1 and maybe a few people along the way. And then we're going to take an in-depth look later on at some of the surprising members of this family tree. What I want to do today, though, especially, I want to accomplish this. I want to point out 4 significant discoveries in the family tree of Jesus. And before I give you the first one, I want to get a running start by just starting with you at verse 1. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. The record of the genealogy of Jesus. The record, the word is biblos. It gives us our word Bible. It means book. The book of the genealogy, the geneseos, gives us our word Genesis. This is the book of the Genesis of Jesus. That is, this is the beginning, this is the record of his roots. He is adopted by Joseph, giving him the legal right as the descendant of everybody in this family tree. This is the book of the generations, the book of the roots, the book of the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning. By the way, that phrase, the book of the generations, isn't found anywhere else in the New Testament. In fact, if you just started working your way backward through the Old Testament, you're not going to find it until you get all the way back, and I'll just turn for the sake of time to Genesis chapter 5 and verse 1, which reads, this is the book of the generations of Adam. It's the only other time You find it. Imagine then this profound implication. There are two books. Adam's book represents the human race. He begins it as a literal historical figure. In fact, Luke's genealogy traces through Mary's going to go all the way back to Adam, the first man. But you have two books. Everyone related to the book of the generations of Adam has this in common. We all die. That's the way the Apostle Paul put it in Romans 5, verse 12. In Adam all die. But Paul is going to refer to Jesus later on in his letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 45, as the last Adam. It's highly significant language. In other words, Adam, the first Adam, stood at the head of the human race. Everybody ultimately is related to him. Jesus stands at the head of a new race, the last Adam. And everyone who belongs to him joins his family tree in this new race, a redeemed race. You became a descendant of Adam, and you got into his book by being born. You get into the book of Jesus by being born again. The book of Adam, by the way, if you went back to that text, you'll discover that chapter and the book of Adam is simply a list of obituaries. In fact, what will strike you as you read that book of the generations of Adam is that phrase that's repeated over and over again. And he died, and he died, and he died, and he died. The book of Jesus is the book of life. Paul calls it that in Philippians chapter 4, verse 3. John the Apostle refers to it as the Lamb's book of life in Revelation 13, verse 8. See, because you're related to Jesus by faith and trust in him, you've been given the right and the privilege to become children of God. You're going to show up in somewhere between verse 18 and beyond of Matthew 1. You're in the tree by faith, a descendant of the Lord Jesus. So the genealogy of Jesus then is a genealogy that you can join for free. It's a family tree you can climb into by faith in Christ. And that's where Matthew is guiding us in what becomes really a wonderful declaration of the gospel. Notice again verse 1. The record of the genealogy of Jesus, and just who is he? Well, he's the Messiah, the Christos, the Greek word Christ. It means anointed one. He's the anointed Messiah. That's who he is. He's the Messiah. And every Jew reading this text would go, really? Again? You see, because they had already had a dozen men step forward claiming to be the Messiah, and there will be many afterward. They'd heard this all before. Here's the book of the generations of Jesus, and he's the Messiah, and they all would have gone, well, that's great. Stand in line. It's interesting to study this period of time and discover that Jesus has only ascended just a few years after a man named Theudas shows up among the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and he claims to be the Messiah. In fact, he says, Jesus failed, and I'm going to succeed. And so everybody who follows me, eventually we're going to head down to the Jordan River, and I'm going to part that water. That'll be the sign that I am the deliverer. Of course, he hadn't been paying his taxes along the way, and the Romans weren't too happy with that, and so they sent the Roman army after him. They captured that mob as they're working their way to the Jordan River, afraid that he'd get away. And they killed most of the followers of Theudas, and they beheaded him, and they took his head back to Jerusalem and prominently displayed it to try to cut down on the followers of these messiahs. He obviously wasn't. Tradition has lingered that Simon the magician introduced to us in Acts chapter 8. You remember he wanted to buy the power of the Spirit? He saw a good market in that. Tradition is that he eventually, sometime after the ascension of the Lord, claimed to be the Messiah, and he's going to do what Jesus didn't do. He's going to jump off the roof of the temple. And he climbed up to the top with more than 400 followers watching below this great demonstration of divine power. And he quoted the verse that God would give his angels charge over him, and he jumped. And that was the last verse he ever quoted. He was not the Messiah. Beloved, just go to the end of the book, and you find at the end of human history as we know it, according to the book of Revelation, who's going to step forward but yet another Messiah? We know him as the anti-Messiah, the anti-Christos, the anti-anointed one. And Satan has been engineering this all the way back to Nimrod, and he keeps failing, but he keeps trying. So this opening line by Matthew isn't going to get a lot of attention. Jesus is just another claimant. But the combination of terms that Matthew weaves together is going to have every Jewish leader coming off his chair, running to the Sanhedrin to check the documents to see if indeed this is true. And that's because Matthew isn't finished. We're going to make it to the end of verse 1 today. Look, the record of the genealogy of Jesus, he's the Messiah. He is the son of David, the son of Abraham. The first of 4 discoveries is that this genealogy validates the royalty of Jesus Christ. He's the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, wait a second, didn't Matthew know that Abraham predates David? Why did he start and turn it around? Well, he turned it around for the sake of emphasis. He's got everybody's undivided attention. He directly relates by his adoption to David. Had to be the Messiah. So here's this opening, rather surprising reality. Jesus is the rightful heir of David's throne. You could paraphrase then this opening line to say nothing more or less than, hey, Israel, here's your king. Hey, world, here's your king. The true Messiah, the legal heir to the throne. Go ahead, inspect the record. Evaluate the evidence of his lineage. And I agree with the evangelical authors in my study who pointed out to me as I read them that to this very day, the Jewish nation will argue against the resurrection of Jesus, never the genealogy. It's indisputable historical fact. They could have searched it through, and I believe that they did. He is the legal heir of David. In fact, Jesus is the descendant here of a dozen more kings. They're all listed. I'll mention a couple before we're done. They knew, by the way, that the son of David, which Matthew calls Jesus 9 times in his gospel, the son of David, the son of David, the son of David. It's like, I don't want you to miss it. He's the son of David. They knew that the true king would bring healing to their land and to the people of Israel. We know that that's going to be fulfilled ultimately in the kingdom when he does, in fact, heal the land, reign upon that throne. But it's interesting that what he does along the way is pull back the curtain every so often and reveal he has the power to heal. And he does it in a literal fashion. I love the way Tolkien, in this massive parable entitled The Lord of the Rings, put that messianic promise this way when he wrote that the hands of the king are the hands of the healer. Jesus knew that there was that desire. He offered them both in a literal way, a kingdom which they refused, unmistakable royalty which they denied, and irrefutable acts of healing. Peter would preach this in his opening sermon after the nation declined the kingdom, killed the king, all part of the providence of God, and Peter's going to lay that out in his first sermon. But he says this, he says, Jesus was validated to you. He was accredited. He was authenticated to you by his miracles, his healing. That's why early in his ministry you find that combined. Blind people are crying out, have mercy on us, oh, Son of David. If you're really the king, can you bring healing in your hands? So we miss the point if we miss the validation. And Matthew is essentially saying, check out the evidence of his royalty. Number two, the genealogy of Jesus proves the honesty of God. It proves the honesty of God. God promised Abraham and that the Messiah would be born from him, related to him. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. Chapter 22, verse 18. That he would have a son who would be a blessing. And you would think immediately, well, that's Isaac. And there is near fulfillment. There is a future fulfillment that would come centuries later. He promised David that a son would sit upon an eternal throne, and we immediately would think that's Solomon, but then just think historically, is he still there? No. That will be ultimately fulfilled in the Lord. This is what God said to David. I will raise up a descendant after you who will come forth from you, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. 2 Samuel chapter 7. That kingdom is yet to come. So understand, beloved, that Jesus is the son of David and the son of Abraham, but he's also showing us in that God kept his word after all. By the way, if you go back in time, God promised Abraham that he would have a son through whom would be a blessing to the entire world, and Abraham probably thought that would be Isaac. It was in near term and certainly through him, but ultimately through Christ. And that answer would come, that son would come 42 generations later. If you think God is taking a long time to answer you, can you hang on? 42 generations later, the Son is born. And the honesty of God proven. Number three, the genealogy of Jesus reveals the sovereignty of God. Satan has been at work trying to distort this line, as I'll point out in a moment, but the list of names structured by Matthew here is the intentionally selected names. He left some names out. He did it in such an arrangement to aid memory, I believe. While Matthew's arranged them on paper, God has arranged them in history at just the right time, in just the right way, orchestrating his divine purposes to prove that same theological point among many others that Paul made to the Galatians in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. At the perfect time, God sent forth his Son. One paraphrase renders it to read, but when the right time came, I like that. The time God decided on, he sent his Son. Another one reads, but when the time arrived that was set by God the Father, God sent his Son. You need to understand, beloved, that God designed all of human history then and now. Don't worry, everything's on time, on track. He designed all of human history around the birth of his Son, which makes Christmas, as we call it, the very center of history. But still, don't you think that the timing of God could be improved? We think about that in our own lives. He's a bit late, maybe too soon, maybe he's forgotten. Wouldn't it be better if God had been born, God the Son, in recent days? Doug O'Donnell wrote with a little humor and realism, provoking my thought, why didn't God send his Son to be born and minister, die, and rise again in the 21st century instead of the first century? Think of the advantages. Imagine the benefit of coming to earth during the era of television and internet, when nearly everything he said and did could be filmed and documented and played on CNN. Well, maybe Fox News, I think they might cover it, I'm not sure, but imagine a streaming video of his every movement. Imagine photographers and reporters camped just a few feet away from Jesus for 3 years straight. Can you imagine the 10 o'clock news starting every night with the latest miracle? Watch him here walking on water. Could play on YouTube forever. Imagine focusing in with the camera on his hands as he's breaking bread that never does disappear and fish that never does go away. Imagine as they're there watching Jesus command Lazarus, come out, Lazarus. Wouldn't it be great? Imagine he writes the news anchor opening. Well, today Jesus healed 10 lepers. We interviewed 9 of them. 1 wasn't found. We understand he went back to thank Jesus. Can you imagine the cameras catching the resurrection? Or maybe even the stone as invisible hands pick it up and out of the track and toss it like a pebble. Wouldn't you love to see that? Wouldn't that have been better? O'Donnell writes, what we wish for is that God's timing was such that follow this, that he removed the need for faith from our faith. That's good. Faith requires faith. But think about the historical record, though. There were eyewitnesses. There were people who were dead, and now they're alive. There were people who were sick and lame and blind, and now they're healed. They went to the Jewish leaders. They were surrounded by their Jewish neighbors and friends. All of this wasn't done in hiding. It was all very open, and Rome was uninterested. They wouldn't carry it on their news if they had it. And the Jewish people were growing as the leaders led them. They would be ultimately infuriated by him. He's messing with our world. He's demanding, he's claiming of us, turn that channel. I'm sick and tired of that guy. I don't need to see him walking on water. There's probably some sleight of hand there. It's all fake. See, God has given us ample evidence according to his plan at just the right time. And it is by faith our eyes are opened to believe the gospel and the evidence we have before us. Number 4, this genealogy highlights the humility of Jesus. I mean, look who he's related to in this list. People like Ron Aaron's great-grandfather, a man married to more than one woman. Well, how about being related to a guy that had 800 wives? And all those concubines. One little kid called them cucumber vines. And it was a tangled mess. How about that guy? People like Remus Reed, thieves, felons. People like Abraham, who although he's the father of Judaism, was a coward at times and a liar. People like David, the king, yes, but also as guilty of murder as the sausage king in Chicago, which he covered up. Judah, if you drop down in verse 2, don't get excited, we're not going that far, but just drop down there for a second. He might have carried the promise of the royal scepter, but he's going to hire a woman who's acting like a prostitute who ends up conceiving by him, bears twins. One of those twins is going to carry on the messianic line. I think we got to keep that skeleton in the closet. And what about the fact that Judah, by the way, in verse 2, it mentions and his brothers. It's sort of a throwaway line, but it's highly significant. Judah and his brothers, don't forget, they're guilty of selling their little brother Joseph to slave traders. I think we ought to keep that one under wraps too. Let's not remind anybody of that. Matthew says, let's bring it all out and hang every skeleton in plain sight. Jesus descended from a line of 15 kings. They're mentioned here. Half of them were men who followed God, though imperfectly, like you and me. The other half hated God, like Manasseh in verse 10. You want to read his bio statement sometime? It's listed in 2 Kings chapter 21. I mean, it's all out there. He did more evil than the pagan nations around him. There's his bio. He sacrificed his sons to Molech. That's an iron god with a with an empty, hollow belly, they'd stoke firewood in there, and the body would grow red hot, and the arms designed to be out like this, and they'd lay a baby in his arms to die an excruciating death. He's in the family tree. His mediums and channelers in his cabinet. He places an idol in the temple precinct. Manasseh murdered so many people that one historian said he filled Jerusalem from one end to the other with innocent blood. Jesus is related, verse 8, to Jehoshaphat, a man who had a growing fascination with Ahab, great model, by the way, and his wife Jezebel. He sanctioned the marriage of his son Jehoram, mentioned in verse 8 here as well, to a woman named Athaliah. Go back if you ever need some exciting bathtub reading, and you can read about that. Look, behind the scenes, you need to understand, again, Satan is constantly at work, trying to pervert, trying to corrupt, frankly, trying to stamp out the line of the Davidic right to the throne. Because if he can stamp it out, he can null and void that promise. There's a gap then. It doesn't work. And he almost succeeded here when Jehoram dies, his heir dies. Athaliah steps forward. She murders every relative in that family so that she can take the throne away and stamp out the name of David's house. And she almost succeeds, except for one grandson, the little infant who's tucked away and hidden for a number of years until he's revealed. And he takes the throne. Here's the point we often miss. We're not just talking about wicked family secrets and evil men and evil women. We're talking about the relatives of Jesus. Sitting in the branches of Jesus' family tree are a bunch of really bad people. Almost as bad as us. If coming to earth to live as a man wasn't humiliating enough for the glorious Son of God, I mean, just from this record, meet his family. Murderers, adulterers, bigamists, polygamists, idol-worshiping, child-sacrificing, incestuous, immoral, proud men and women, which led one author to write, Jesus comes from the right stock, but it's really bad stock. But isn't it a picture of the human race to which he joined? Why are none of these skeletons hidden? So that we can see them. Jesus didn't come to praise his forefathers. He came to die for them. So that they, by faith, looking toward his sacrifice, we looking backward, can be saved by faith and trust in him. Paul will spell it out this way. It is a trustworthy statement and deserving of all acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. 1 Timothy 1:15. These people are like you and me, sinners in need of saving. And Paul says, this is deserving of all acceptance. So my question is, have you accepted it? This one who came to die for sinners. Sinners. See, the good news then is that you're not too wicked to qualify to join his family. Here's the surprising news from the family tree of Jesus, and there are more. But if Jesus isn't ashamed of his ancestors, he is not ashamed of his descendants. Redeemed sinners like you and me, whose names have been written in the Lamb's book of life. Yes, there are two books. The book of Adam's race, you join that one by birth. The book of the Lamb, the Lamb's book of life, you join that one, not by birth, but a new birth. By faith. When you say at some point in your life, I understand the gospel, and I have nothing to offer but my sin. I'm a sinner. I deserve to be mentioned in those names. But I am going to claim Jesus, not just as, maybe one more in a long line of Messiah wannabes. He is my Messiah. When you say more than, yes, okay, I believe he's a king. He's a direct descendant of David, but you say, he is my king. He's my king.